All right, I will say good morning, a good Chodesh, an incredible schus, Baruch Hashem, to be able to come together on this last day of Menachem Av, first day of Rosh Chodesh Elul, Eretz Hashem. To continue our journey through Basra, we begin by thanking all of our sponsors, to thank our TALMUD TORAH sponsors. Last day for the month of Menachem Av, the Tilson and Wohl families from Eretz YIsrael, sending their love from Eretz YIsrael and inviting us in Eretz Hashem to come and join them. Maybe Zochem Eretz Hashem b'sha'a tova u'mitzlacha. So our week of learning sponsors, Leah Sol, wishing a Mazel Tov to Avraham and Zeesy Silber on the birth of Shaya Silber. Baruch Hashem, may his parents be Zocha. Tima gadol him l'torah l'chopa l'maisim tovim, and wishing a Mazel Tov to Robyn Schaffer Chet Wyman on their marriage. Our day of learning sponsors for today, the Hoffman and Melamed families, in the merit of a peaceful and safe Chodesh Elul for all of Am Yisrael and Eretz YIsrael. And of course, as always, we dedicate our learning in this chus of our precious hostages. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Eretz Hashem, bring them home b'shalom and b'karav, and in the chus of our precious soldiers, may HaKadosh Baruch Hu allow them to be successful b'chol ma'asei yadehem. And a special welcome to Rabbi Nachum Sperling, who is a shir member from Flatbush, New York, who I just met. Baruch Hashem was traveling through Baltimore and is here attending in person on his way to his father-in-law's 98th birthday. The birthday boy should be Zochem. To Arichos Yomi V'Sham Me'ah V'Esem Shanim Tovos. Rabbi Nachum, a schus to learn with you and wonderful to meet you in person. Baruch haba. Baruch haba. I will say with that, we have a lot to do today in Eretz Hashem. Today's daf is Ayin 70. We are picking up on Samech Tesam Abayz 69b, and we are picking up 4 lines up from the bottom. Let's remember again, the topic of our sugi remains the same, which is in general, when you go ahead and you sell something, so depending on the verbiage that you use, determines ultimately what is included in the transaction. So for example, Amar le lebar me'ilani. So let's say again, I'm selling a field to Reuven. I say to Reuven, I'm selling you the field except for trees, without trees. So I isle ilane lebar me'ilani. So okay, so if there are trees on the field, then okay, then it's clear, I'm selling him the field, but I'm withholding the trees. And I will say, now here's what's interesting, and this is why it's important also to understand, we always speak about this, that one of the differences between, let's say, English and Hebrew / Lashon HaKodesh, because Hebrew and Lashon HaKodesh aren't necessarily the same thing, or is the nuance. So for example, in English, when you say trees, what does trees include? What is that? Trees, right? As they say, guns, trees, right? But remember, again, in Hebrew, so there's a difference between an ilan and a dekel. So a dekel is a palm tree. An ilan refers to other forms of trees. So here's what's interesting. So a person goes out, I said, Reuven, I'm selling you the field, lebar me'ilani, I'm withholding the trees. So if there are trees, I'm withholding the trees. What happens if there are no trees, but there are palm trees? Okay, so we understand that really what I'm withholding are the palm trees. What happens if there are no trees at all, but there are vines? So ultimately, the bar megufni, that I'm withholding the vines. Ilane, the gufni, the bar ilani. Ultimately, again, at the end of the day, if halacha lemaisa, something wrong? No. Good. Excellent. I isle gufne lebar megufne. Ilani v'gufne lebar ilani. What happens if halacha lemaisa? What happens if halacha is the following situation? Let's say the field has. Good. Ilani v'gufne, what happens if the field has both trees and vines? Lebar me'ilani. So the idea over here is I'm holding back the trees, but not the vines. Ilani v'dikli, what happens if the field has both trees and palm trees? Lebar me'ilani. So again, I will say, so the idea over here, gufni v'dikli, if it has vines and palm trees, lebar me'gufni. So that's interesting, right? So we would say that an ilan refers more to a vine than it does to a dekel, which makes sense because since the palm tree itself has such an independent identity, again, unless I say dekel, we're assuming it doesn't mean dekel. The only time that maybe it means dekel is if there's nothing else in the field but a dekel. Okay, so I'll say, and by the way, I just want to point out, this also goes in line, remember, there's an overarching principle over here that we learned, must have been maybe early last week, that in general, whenever a person says something transactionally, they never mean their words to be levatala. So even if we have to reinterpret the words a little bit to make them make sense, that's what we do. Okay, let's go back there. Says the Gemara. Amarav, we'll say last line on Samech Tesima base. Very interesting statement of here. Amarav, Kol she'olin lo b'chavel havishir. So I'll say, so listen to this. So any tree, so remember, one of the interesting things that we saw, I think one of the most riveting pieces of information that we saw in yesterday's daf was, up until I came to the Mishnah on Samech Tesima base in Basra, I would have thought that when you sold a field, trees are automatically included in the field. Because again, obviously the trees are situated in the field. What the Mishnah taught me is that a tree that is chashuv is not included in the field. So we gave two paradigmatic examples of chashuv trees. What were they? Two paradigmatic examples. Grafted carob, right? Grafted carob and pruned sycamore. Okay, so now Rav is expanding on this a little bit, and he says as follows: Kol she'olin lo b'chavel. Any tree that is so large that halach l'maisa, you would have to go ahead and use a rope. In other words, in order to go ahead and climb it, in order to harvest its fruit, is automatically not included in the sale. Now the Rashbam comments over here, he says, look at the last Rashbam on the daf, Kol she'olin lo b'chavel, l'lakei perosav, chashiv ilan, u'bedekel mayri, kedim mefarish l'kamesha, gavoa harbe perosav b'rosho. So the Rashbam says, b'pashtot, this is referring to a date palm. It's referring to a date palm, because the date palm grows very high. As I was saying, one of the most beautiful things, in Eretz YIsrael, when you drive down from Yerushalayim to the Dead Sea, right? So you see so many of those palm groves, and you see how tall those date palms grow. So Rav is saying, but it's interesting because Rav is not mentioning a dekel by name, yet the Rashbam understands that it's referring to a date palm. But Rav is more espousing a principle. Any tree that is so large that you would have to use a rope in order to scale it, in order to get its fruit, by definition, is not included in a sale. Okay? But any tree that's not so tall, in other words, any tree that's shorter, and therefore you could harvest the fruit without using a rope, then halach l'maisa lo havishir means you're not withholding it for yourself, which means what? It's included in the sale. So now, like a little bit of a new metric, so to speak, in terms of determining which trees are included, which trees are not included. So up until now, when we saw the Mishnah, we assumed all trees are included with the exception of two: the grafted carob and the pruned sycamore. Now Rav is explaining there's also a din in height. Any tree that is so tall that requires a rope, by definition, is not automatically included in the sale. Shorter than that is included in the sale. Top of Ayin 70, Eva Dayani Gola Amri, the judges of the diaspora, the Dayanim of the diaspora. Rashbam points out over here, this is Shmuel and Karna. So Shmuel and Karna ultimately again say Kol sha'ol kovesh lo havishir, Kol she'ena ol kovsho lo havishir. So this is interesting. And literally translated, any tree that is so small that the yoke passes over it. Now what does this mean? So remember, the animal is plowing the field. The animal is attached to a yoke. The yoke has width. So depending on the type of the tree, either the yoke could go straight, and the tree is like small, right, and flexible, so that the yoke just passes right over it, versus a tree that is firm and stiff, that the yoke would have to go around it. So therefore, again, Dayana Gola say, any tree, kol sha'ol kovsha, which literally means the yoke can capture it, which means that the yoke could simply go over it. Rashbam says over here, Charshin hayu bebakar, Savev ha'ilanos, Simha ol kofif es ha'ilan va'over ashar ledarko, ve'ina ilan ma'akiv ashar lo chashiv. Umiyom einalos gidolim besada. Right. So what I see, the idea over here is, if the tree is so small, so flexible, that the yoke could literally just pass over it, and the tree will just bend. So lo havishir. Lo havishir means such a tree is included in the sale, which makes sense. The idea is if it's that small and that flexible, that the oxen doesn't even have to maneuver around it, but essentially you could just go over it, right? Over it. Then l'maisa that's not significant and therefore included in the sale. And the Gemara says, Kol she'ein ha'ol kovsho havishir, but any tree that is so significant that the yoke can't pass over it. Rather, what ends up happening, the yoke has to go around it. That is not included in the sale. That is more substantive. So I will say, so that the Gemara looks at this as a machlokes. right? We have Rav versus Shmuel. So Rav telling me, again, the metric for which trees are included, not included, depends on how tall the tree is. Do you need a rope to get up there? In which case it's not included. Or don't you need a rope? In which case it is included. Shmuel, does the yoke go over it or does the yoke go around it? So we look at this as a contradiction, to which the Gemara ultimately answers, V'lo pligi. There's not a contradiction here. They're actually talking about different trees. Ha b'dikli, ha b'ilani. One is talking about a date palm, and this is why the Rashbam said what he said. So Rav is referring to a date palm, right? The date palm grows very tall. So if the date palm is so tall that you require a rope to get up there, then it's not included in the sale. But if it's short enough that you don't need a rope to get up there, then it is included in the sale. Versus Shmuel, who's referring to stama tree, ilanos, right? Regular fruit trees. So the mice, again, if it's so small or so flexible, bless you, that the yoke could just go ahead and go over it, then ultimately, again, it's included. But if the yoke would go around it, it's not included. So not a contradiction, talking about two different things. Okay, incredible. Chutz mecharav ploni, chutz misadan ploni mau. Okay, so we'll say this is a very interesting case. So imagine the following scenario. I'm selling a field to Reuven, and I say to Reuven, I'm selling you this field, but with the exception of this particular grafted carob tree, or with the exception of this particular pruned sycamore tree. So I'm excluding the tree from the sale. Now, I will say, what's the problem? Remember, these trees are not included in the sale to begin with. Right? They're already not included. So the shaila is, what does it mean when I go ahead and I make this statement? Right? What are the ramifications, ultimately, again, of making such a statement like this? So in general, in other words, I'm excluding something that essentially is already excluded. Now, to complicate matters a little bit more, let's assume that in this case, there are other carob and sycamore trees on the property. So now the shaila is, what am I saying transactionally? What am I doing? So here we go. So let me name Rav Ploni. So I say, Reuven, I'm selling you the field, but I'm excluding this particular carob tree or this particular sycamore tree. And by the way, I'm not going to keep saying it, but we're talking about a grafted carob and a pruned sycamore. These are the type of chashav trees that are normally excluded. So mahu, what's the halacha? Also, charafu delo kani hashar charuvim kani. So, do we say that since I'm specifying this carob and this sycamore, so what I mean to say is these two are excluded, but all the other ones are included. All right. Oh, the Gemara says, "Oh, dilma shacharuva nami lo kani," or maybe not. Maybe at the end of the day, no. My statement essentially is just extraneous. Right? It's not really necessary, but this is a regular sale, and essentially what I'm saying is everything is excluded as it's normally excluded. I both say now again, so you can say to yourself, but if that's the case, that everything is excluded, all carobs, all sycamores, then what? Then what's the shaila? Then what am I saying? So remember, we spoke about this already. What could I be saying? Well, so what am I retaining for myself? Right? What am I retaining for myself? Right of way. Remember, we'll say, going back to our previous, and Rashbam mentions this, he mentions it later, but I'm going to mention it to you now. We spoke about this. Now remember again, we passed like Rabbi Akiva, right? Remember we saw this, we'll say, Hashkafa l'maisa and Halacha l'maisa. She said over this shtickle at my grandson's bris. Right? We pass in this way, Hashkafa l'maisa and Halacha l'maisa, which is Mocher ba'ayin yafa mocher, which means when you sell property, generally you sell with a good eye, with incredible generosity, to the point that you don't even retain right of way for yourself. You'd have to purchase that back. So now it could very well be that when I say, so I'm selling the field to Reuven, I say, Reuven, I'm selling you this field with the exception of this charav, of this shikma, this sycamore tree. So now, two ways to interpret the statement. Maybe what I'm doing is I'm retaining this one for myself, but selling you all the other ones. That's possibility A. Possibility B is that no, they're all excluded. So why am I making the statement? Because what am I doing? I'm retaining right of way for myself. That's essentially the shaila is, how do we interpret my statement? Amrlei, lo kana. So ultimately, remember again, this is Rav Acha bar Rav Huna asking Rav Sheshes. So Rav Sheshes says that, yes, Rav Sheshes answered, lo kana, meaning Reuven does not acquire anything. Doesn't acquire anything. He doesn't, in other words, we essentially look at this statement as, I'm excluding all sycamore trees, all carob trees. Everything is excluded from the sale because that's the way these type of sales work. So why am I making the statement? It could very well be just to retain right of way. Okay, fine. Say svei. So the Gemara raises a kasha. Say svei chutz mecharav ploni. So if I go ahead and I say, I'm selling you this field with the exception of this particular carob tree. Chutz misadan ploni, with the exception of this sycamore tree. So lo kana, ultimately, again, Ruvain does not acquire. Now the Gemara says, my lav osa charav hu de lo kana, ha shar Ruvain kana. Does it not mean that Ruvain doesn't acquire this particular carob tree? Right? In other words, the fact that I excluded a carob tree, a sycamore tree, means to exclude something specific from the sale. But by excluding something specific, what am I by extension? What am I doing? I'm including everything else. So doesn't it mean that he, by definition, goes ahead and gets all the other trees in the sale? To which the Gemara says, "Amalei lo, afilu shar charuven nami lo kana." No. What it means ultimately, again, is he does not acquire any of the carob trees or any of the sycamore trees. In other words, we'll say at the end of the day, the exclusion of the carob trees and the sycamore trees it's built in transactionally. So what do we do with my statement when I say except for this tree, except for that tree? So Lamais, again, like we said before, that would really refer to right of way. Really what I'm retaining for myself is right of way for these particular trees. Teida di'ilu amrlei. And the Gemara says this has to be true. Because after all, look at the following case. Teida di'ilu amrlei sadai mechur lecha chutz misidei plonis. So let's say, I say to Ruvain, I'm selling you my field, right? But I'm not selling you with the exception of this other field, Sidei Plonis. So the Gemara says, Hahi hu de lo kani, ha'achranaisa kani. Would we say that Ruvain doesn't acquire that excluded field, but acquires all the other fields? Of course not. Ela lo kana. So we'll say, rather, again, what you have to say is the same way that we wouldn't assume that Ruvain would acquire other fields not mentioned in the transaction. He also doesn't acquire other carob trees. Now, this is interesting, because what the Gemara essentially is saying is that carob and sycamore trees are essentially looked at as other fields. As other fields, they are by definition inherently excluded items. Hacha nami lo kana. So too, they are not included. So this is really quite interesting. So what we see is the concept of the grafted carob trees, the pruned sycamore trees, are so chashuv that by definition they are always excluded, unless of course what? They are explicitly included. So in other words, this is very interesting that even in this case, it sounds like we're here. I'm saying, Reuven, I'm selling you the field with the exception of the sycamore tree on the northeast corner of the field. Let's say I'm specific, right? I'm specific. So you would have thought, okay, I'm dafka excluding that one, which means I'm excluding everything else. Kamash Malon, no. These items are so chashuv that by definition they are always excluded unless explicitly included. That's the way it works. So what's the meaning of my statement? So why am I singling out the sycamore tree in the northeast corner? Like the Rashman points out, right of way. Whereas normally, again, mocher ba'ayin yafa mocher, and therefore I would be selling away. I'd have to repurchase. I'd have to buy back right of way. In this kind of case, I'm getting right of way as well. Okay, the ikeda amri was an alternate version of the previous discussion. The ikeda amri by minei. So there's always an excitement in an ikeda amri. Right? You might not be feeling it this hour of the morning, but I'm telling you, but there is an excitement in Ikeda. What's the excitement in Ikeda Amri? Something Ikeda Amri is the Gemara saying, by the way, there's another way to see things. One of the most exciting things in life is when you open your mind and you open your heart to other points of view. You may not accept them, right? And you may come to reject them. And you may feel that at the end of the day that they are false. But Lamaisa, there is something incredibly liberating when you don't get stuck in your own head and you don't get stuck in your own ideas and you're willing to see things through a different lens. Again, you may not accept it and you may come to vehemently reject it, but there is just a liberating experience in the Ikeda. So it's almost like the Gemara says, by the way, so we have this whole thing worked out. It's beautiful, right? It's great. We could stop here. We could call it a day right now, and we feel accomplished. The Gemara says, by the way, Ikeda. There's an alternate version. There's another way to see this. It may or may not be correct, but let's at least go through the exercise of seeing this sugya through a different lens, conditioning us to go through life with the ability to see things through a different lens as well. So we'll say again, same people involved, but alternate version of the previous discussion. Rav Acha bar Rav Huna asked Rav Sheshes, Chutz mechatzi charav ploni, Chutz mechatzi stan ploni mahu. So this is interesting. So we'll say, so here what's different in this version. In this version, it's quite fascinating. And again, we'll say, in Ikeda Army, there was a different version of how the conversation went down. It's the same people. Rav Acha bar Rav Huna is asking for Rav Sheshes. But in this version, Rav Acha is asking, if I sold the field to Reuven, and I said, Reuven, I'm selling you the field with the exception of half a carob tree. So in this case, I'm retaining half a tree. I'm retaining half a sycamore tree. So Mahu. So what do you do in this case? Mahu. Shar Charuven Vaday Lokani. So I'll say, so now, according to this approach, we could say, look, it goes without saying that obviously the other carob trees or the other sycamore trees, right? Ultimately, again, he's not Kona. Ha mashashir ba'osa charav kani. So do we say that ultimately again, but the half that I yielded to Reuven, he does acquire, right? So in other words, I understand the other sycamore trees, the other carob trees, Reuven's not going to have a piece in, right? I still retain those. What about the half that I actively yielded to him? Does that belong to him? Oh, Dilma afilu mashashir ba'osa charav nami lokani. Or maybe even the half that I yielded to him, he also doesn't acquire. Doesn't acquire. The Gemara says, good. So the Gemara says, Amrale Lokani. To which Rav Sheshes responded, no, even the half that you yielded, he doesn't acquire. So the Gemara says, Eisvei, we'll ask Kashanat, Chutz micharav ploni, Chutz michatzi zdan ploni, Shar Charuven Lokana. So we'll say, the Gemara quotes the Brayso. The Brayso says, if I sell to Reuven a field with the exception of half a carob tree or half a sycamore tree, so the Lashon of the Brayso says, Reuven doesn't acquire the rest of the carob trees. So the Gemara says, my love, Shar Charuven hu delokana, ha mashashir ba'osa charav kana. Does that not mean it's the other trees that Reuven doesn't acquire, but the half, so to speak, that I yielded to him, he does acquire? Amar Leilo. He says, no, afilu mashashir ba'osa charav nami lokana. No, even the half that I quote unquote yielded to him, right? He still doesn't acquire. After all, so the Gemara says, Teda dilu amar le sadai mechur lacha chutz michatzi sadeh ploni. So I'll say, yeah, if I were to say, Reuven, I'm selling you the field, with the exception of half of the other field. Chutz michatzi sadeh ploni. So the Gemara says, hahu delokana, halidach kana. What do we say? It's that excluded field that he doesn't acquire, but he acquires my other fields. Ella lokani. Rather, both the same way that he wouldn't acquire other fields, so too over here he doesn't acquire the half of the carob tree or the sycamore tree. So I'll say. So the truth is, interestingly enough, it actually doesn't matter which version you go with. It's the same principle. What's the principle? The principle is carob trees and sycamore trees are always excluded from real estate transactions. They are not included. And again, this is the grafted carob, the prune sycamore. They are chashuv, they're real estate entities onto their own, and therefore they are never, ever included in the sale of real property, unless, of course, you actively include them. That's the chap over here. You actively include them. Even if you say, Reuven, I'm selling you this field, right, with the exclusion of this sycamore tree, which again intuitively sounds like if I'm excluding this one, I'm including all the other ones. That's not how we interpret it. We interpret it as the exclusion means, again, I'm holding back for myself right of way, but everything is actually excluded. So we'll say, so that's the bottom line, halacha l'maisa, which again just shows you, it's also fascinating, it just shows you how chashuv these trees were. Right, which is just fascinating how chashuv these trees were, that they were automatically excluded from every property transaction, unless of course they were explicitly included. Incredible. All right, let's go back there. So the Gemara says, "B'minei Rav Amram ben Rav Chisda." Both say, very interesting case here. Hamafkid etzo chavero b'shtar. So I'll say, listen to this. I deposited an object with Reuven. Now, what I did is I drew up a document that essentially that highlighted or that put into writing this transaction. I, Shmuel Silber, deposited with Reuven, I don't know, whatever, Sefer Torah. Let's be from. So yeah, I deposited with him a Sefer Torah. So I'll say, and I wrote up a document that said I deposited with him a Sefer Torah. So I'll say, so now what happened? V'amarlo. So now I come back to Reuven to get back my Sefer Torah. V'amarlo. I'll say first wide line on the bottom. V'amarlo. Hachzartem lecha. And Reuven, I come back to get my object, and Reuven says, I gave it back to you. I gave it back to you already. So Mahu, what is the halacha? What is the halacha in such a situation? So mi amrinan, migo di by amr nan sumehem. And I was saying, here's what's interesting. Now remember, we're assuming over here that Reuven is like a shomer sacher. Right? Reuven is shomer sacher. So remember again, technically speaking, when I come back to Reuven and say, Reuven, I want back my Sefer Torah, what could Reuven have said to me? What could he have said? It was stolen. It was stolen. Right? There was an ones. And what would happen if Reuven would claim ones? As a shomer chinam, he is pater. So, in other words, so maybe he has a migo. Right? So now, Reuven is not saying it was stolen. What is Reuven saying? What is Reuven saying? I gave it back to you. So again, what's his migo? So remember, we know how the concealed migo works. Migo means since. Since Reuven could have made a claim that would have exempted him, right, and this whole story would have been done, he is believed to make an inferior claim, right? Since he could have made a superior claim, he's believed in when he makes the inferior claim. So he could have made the claim that the object was stolen, and he would have been believed. That's it. So now that he claims I gave it back to you, he should be believed. On the other hand, here's the only problem with that. If Reuven really did give it back to me, then I will say, what should I no longer be in possession of? The document. Remember, again, the way this document would work is, what happens to this document? The moment that Reuven gives you back the Sefer Torah, what happens to the document? What happens to the document? Well, Bepashas, one of two things happens. Either it gets torn up, or Reuven takes it. But one thing is clear, which is Reuven is not going to let me hold on to it, because then that would give me the ability to potentially collect a second time. So it's a little strange. It's just, so on one hand, Reuven has a migo. He could have claimed it was stolen, but he's claiming again he returned it, so maybe you should believe because of the migo. On the other hand, I have the shtar, and having that shtar does look a little bit strange. So the Gemara says, Amarle mehemen. So ultimately, yes, so remember again, this is Rav Amram is asking for Rav Chisda, and Rav Chisda responds, Amarle mehemen. Right? Rav Chisda says Reuven is believed. Incredible, right? Reuven is believed to go ahead and say that halacha l'maisa, he returned it. But what about the fact that I can claim Reuven? So if you really did if you really did return it to me, why do I still have the shtar? Amarle Rav Chisda responds, l'tamech v'chi amarle nensu mi matzi amarle shtar chabiyadi. So again, if let's say Reuven were to claim it was stolen, right? Would I be able to claim, oh, it was stolen, but what is the shtar doing in my possession? In other words, the shtar is helpful, but at the end of the day, Rav Chisda says Reuven is still believed because of the migo. So in the same way, if Reuven were to claim it was stolen, the fact that I have the shtar in my hand doesn't erode Reuven's claim. So again, everything is operating from the migo. Once Reuven could have claimed it was stolen, so therefore by definition, he's believed to say it was returned. And even though when he says it's returned, I say, how can you say I have the shtar in my hand? The same way that if he would have said it was stolen, my possession of the shtar does not erode his claim. So too when he says, I returned it, my possession of the shtar also doesn't erode his claim, which sounds so strange. Because it just begs the question that what good is the shtar, right? What good is the shtar? But hold on. To which Rav Amram said, but 1 second. Amad will say, sof, ki amarle nensu lav shvua boi. Okay, 1 second. First of all, let's clarify something. Right? When I deposit this Sefer Torah with Reuven, right? And now I come to collect it. And Reuven claims that it was stolen. So remember again, we know this from our Bava Metzia days. So it's not just the pshat that Reuven says, I'm stolen, have a great life, Hatzlach, I'm sorry things didn't work out, right? Better luck next time, right? There's a shavua. In other words, if you're a shomer and you want to exempt yourself through a claim of gneva va'aved or gneva, being ones, then ultimately, again, you have to swear. So the Gemara says, sof kemalei nansu lav shvabai, hachinami my naman. The Gemara says, Rav Chisda says, oh no, you're right. What do I mean in this case? My naman b'shvua. So to be clear, Rav Chisda says, so just to kind of tie this together, here we go. So now, according to Rav Chisda, I deposit a Sefer Torah with Reuven. I decide, you know what? just so there shouldn't be any misunderstandings. I write up a star. And in the star I write, I, Shmuel Silber, deposited a Sefer Torah with Ruvain for safekeeping. I sign it, right, Ruvain signs it, Eidim, whole thing over here. Rashma also points out, this Gemara is operating under the premise, which we spoke about, which is that when you lend something to someone with Eidim, repayment need not be done in the presence of Eidim. There's a lot of other information that's happening over here, but we'll stay focused on this. So now I come back to get back my Sefer Torah. Ruvain says, I gave it back to you. So Rav Chisda says, Ruvain is believed. Why is Ruvain believed? Essentially, there's a migo that Haloch L'maisa, since he could have said it was stolen and he would have been believed, so too now that he says I return, it's believed. What about the shtar? So the same way that the presence of the shtar would not have undermined his taina that it was stolen of ones, so too the presence of the shtar doesn't undermine his taina ultimately that it was returned. But to be clear, the claim by itself is not enough. The claim has to be bolstered by a shvuah. So Ruvain has to swear. So there is a mechanism here. There is a mechanism here to make sure that Ruvain is telling the truth, or at least to try to ascertain that Ruvain is telling the truth. We make him take a shvuah. When returning the object. Incredible. So the Gemara says, okay, this is very interesting. So lema b'plukta dehani d'hanoi. So we'll say, so maybe this machlokes between Rav Chisda and the Tanakama. So we'll say the Gemara is understanding over here that there's an inherent machlokes in this, right? What's the inherent machlokes? So when I come back and I want to claim my Sefer Torah, and Ruvain says he went ahead and he returned it to me, so Rav Chisda says mehemen. The Rabbanan, on the other hand, seem to feel, no, shtarcha biyadi, my boy. No, you're not believed. Because if you're claiming that it was returned, then we have a big problem, because why do I have the document in my hands? So the Gemara says, this machlokes seems to line up with a different machlokes. So we'll say, now listen to this. Shtarkis hayos al yisolim. So we'll say shtarkis. So we'll say, this is very, very exciting. You thought it couldn't get any more exciting this morning? Well, you were wrong. It can. So we'll say, so remember again, we're coming now back to a very interesting sugya that we had in Bava Metzia about an iska. So take a quick look at the Rashbam. We're not going to do the whole thing, but let's just take a quick look at it. It's the last wide line of the Rashbam. Shtar kis hayos al yison. Watch this. Ruvain shnasan mos l'Shimon l'machzis schar. So Ruvain gave money to Shimon for machzis schar. So let's say, remember again the way iska works very, very, very quickly. The way iska works is Ruvain is the capital partner. So Ruvain wants to go into business with Shimon. So now what happens? Ruvain wants to furnish the capital, and Shimon's going to do the work. So now we want to avoid any type of ribis situations. So essentially the way the transaction works is like this. We look at the capital essentially divided into two pieces. There's part of it that's a loan, and there's part of it that's a pikadon. That's a deposit. Now the part that is the loan. So let's say now Ruvain is the capital partner giving the money to Shimon. So the half of the pikadon, that's the pikadon. So Shimon is obligated to give back to Ruvain. 50% of the investment capital is obligated to give back. That part of the investment capital also, again, is what Ruvain, the capital partner, makes his money on. And we're assuming they're dividing up profits and losses 50-50. So now we look at let's give numbers. So let's say Ruvain gives Shimon $100,000. So again, we're going to simplify this just for the sake of this case. So $50,000 of it is looked at as a pikadon, which is Ruvain is depositing with Shimon $50,000. That's Shimon's money. Whatever profits accrue on that money is accruing on Ruvain's money. Right? Because it's a pikadon, it's a deposit, it's not a halva, it's not a loan. So therefore now Shimon is going to manage it, but whatever profits accrue on that 50% of the pikadon is never ribis, because it's not a loan, it's a pikadon, it's a deposit. It's a deposit. So therefore, when the transaction is over at some point in time, Shimon will return either the profits on the pikadon or the pikadon itself. The other 50% is a halva, is a loan. What happens with that 50%? So that halva is a loan that Ruvain gives to Shimon. Shimon then does with that money whatever he wants. That's a halva. Whatever profits are generated on that money belong to Shimon, because the halva is at some point in time the halva may be called, maybe not be called, but that's the way iska works. So half of it is pikadon, half of it is Halva, and again, back to our bubments, and I know for some of you, our Ezu Neshach days is a trigger, right? But Lanaisa, but back to those days. So again, that's essentially how you could go ahead and have a capital partner and a managing partner, and at the end of the day, avoid any type of ribis issues. So now, watch this. So back to the Rashbam. So Reuven shenasan ma'os l'shimin l'machzis schar. So that's what it means. That's lashon machzis schar. So Reuven gave $100,000 to Shimon. 50,000 of it was a pikadon, and any monies generated on that would belong to Reuven. 50% of it was a halva, a loan, and any money generated on that would belong to Shimon. So v'kasav lo shtar kama hifkilo umeis Shimon. Okay, Baruch Ta'anam, Shimon died. V'hotzi Reuven osa shtar yisomim l'dva mehen pikdono. So now what happens? I will say. So now Reuven comes to the Yisomim, right? Has the shtar. Now Reuven has the document. So Reuven obviously wants to extract his money from the Yisomim. By Yisomim tonin shema avinu hachzir lecha. So the Yisomim say, listen, Reuven, we're not saying no, but maybe our father paid you back. Inami betainas bari tanu vilo haya milva ba'alma shehilva Reuven l'shimon umei shimon kol amamodu dinishma. So we'll say, or they're saying, either they're making a possible claim or a definitive claim. Either Yisomim are saying, maybe our father paid you back, or maybe they're saying, we know that our father paid you back, or our father did pay you back. So we'll say, so let's go to the Gemara. So the Sanya. So we'll say, so if Reuven comes, so now remember again, Shimon the borrower, managing partner died. Reuven comes with this document and he wants to extract his money from the Yisomim. So what's the halacha? So the Gemara says, Dayani Gola Omri, Nishba V'gova Kulo. So the Dayanim of the Gola, which will also be identified as Shmuel and Karna, they claim Reuven swears that he never got paid back from Shimon, and he collects the amount that is mentioned in the shtar. The Dayani Eretz YIsrael, Dayanim of Eretz YIsrael say no, Nishba V'gova Mechza. Ultimately, again, he goes in, he swears, and he collects half. He collects 50%. So the Gemara says, now here's what's interesting. With the Kuli Alma Isli V'nardoi. Everyone agrees with the position of the Nardom. What are the Nardom? Say, Dami Nardoi, Hai Iska, Palga Milva, or Palga Pikadon. Everyone agrees, we'll say that the way this works, I just mentioned, half of it is considered to be a loan, and half of it is considered to be a Pikadon. So my law of Bahakamifli, so are not arguing about the following idea. Demar Savar Matsi Amalei Shtar Chabiyadi My Boy. So the Dayane Gola say that Reuven could say to the Yisomim, hey guys, if your father paid me back, then why do I have the shtar? There's only one reason I have the shtar, which is why? Why? Because I haven't been paid back. And therefore the Dayane Eretz YIsrael say that Reuven has the ability to swear and collect the entire amount. Umar Savar Lo Amri. And the other opinion says, no, we don't say that. In other words, possession of the shtar does not automatically translate into a reality that you weren't paid back. So which one says, no, lo. The Chuli Amma Islu Rav Chisda. So we'll say the Gemara actually suggests no. Everyone agrees with Rav Chisda. So remember again, what did Rav Chisda say? Rav Chisda said again in our previous case, I go over to Reuven, right? I deposit the Sefer Torah with Reuven. I wrote up a shtar. I come back to get my Sefer Torah from Reuven. What does Reuven say? I'm so sorry it was stolen. What's the and now what do I say to Reuven? Right? I'm sorry. Reuven says I gave it back to you. Reuven says he returned it to me. I said to Reuven, I don't know about that because why do I have the shtar? If you return why do I have the shtar? Rav Chisda said Reuven is believed. He's believed. Now essentially he's believed because of the koach of migo, and the same way that had he claimed that it was stolen, the presence of the shtar would not undermine his claim. So too, when he claims it was returned, it also doesn't undermine his claim. So everyone agrees with that. So what's the machlokes over here? So the Dayane Eretz YIsrael say like this: if the Yisomim were right, and the father actually and Shimon repaid Reuven, Shimon would have said that to his kids. Because this is a big transaction. And this would be a big debt to leave his children with. So had he really paid back Reuven, he would have said something to his children. Umar Savar is incredible. Emar Malach Hamaves Huda Ansei. Others say, no, Shimon meant to tell his kids. But what? Sometimes the Malach Hamaves steps in before you have a chance to say what you need to say. Which I will say, by the way, just is such an overwhelming yesod. How important it is in our relationships to say the things that need to be said and not to wait. Tell your children you love them. Tell your parents you appreciate them. Tell your spouse how much you value them. Don't assume that people know how you feel. Say the things that need to be said and don't wait. And don't wait. Because you know how many people wait for the right time to say the things that need to be said. And what happens? The Gemara says, sometimes Malach HaMaves Huda'an say, sometimes the Malach HaMaves comes sooner than we think. And we leave this world without having had the opportunity to say the things that need to be said. Don't wait. Don't wait. The I love yous should be said often and plentifully. Right? The compliments, the words of encouragement, say it. Say it. Don't wait till you get around to it. Don't wait for the right moment. Say it. So the Gemara says maybe Shimon meant to tell his kids. Maybe Mendel tells kids that I repaid this debt, but what happened? The Malach HaMaves came a little bit too early. Shalach Rafuna Bar Avin. Hamafke Itzach Havero. So I'll say, so again. So therefore, it sounds like, based on what we're saying over here, that kind of going back for just a second, that everyone does agree with Rav Chisda. Right? And therefore, I will say, which is very interesting, in this Halva case, as much as, not Halva, Pikadon case, I've deposited the Sefer Torah with Ruvain. And I have the shtar for it, yet with all of that, halacha l'maisa, again, since he has the nigo, even though, and he's claiming, I returned it, even though I have the shtar, he's believed, which is quite fascinating. So we'll say, so a corollary case, this, we'll just do one more line and then we'll stop. So the Gemara says, so similar, Rav Huna bar Avin sent the following case. If I deposit something with my friend with the shtar, which in other words, so I deposit a Sefer Torah with Ruvain, and I record this transaction in a document. And I come back to get my Sefer Torah, and Ruvain says, I gave it back to you. Naaman, the halacha is, ultimately, again, Ruvain is Naaman. Ushtar kisi yotzel yisomim, nishpa v'gova kulo. And yet, I will say, with all of that, if you have a shtar kiss, that's our iska case, the case we just saw, the yotzel yisomim, so the yisomim go ahead and swear, nishpa v'nota, I swear, and I collect everything. So that's a contradiction. Those are two contradictory rulings. The Gemara says, Tarti, how does that make any sense? How does that make any sense? To which the Gemara says, Shaini Hasam Din, Isa Depari Meima Aron. Now, the Yisomim case is different. Why? Because in such a big Iska, had Shimon really paid back Ruvain, he would have said something to his kids. So we paskin like Rav Chisda, but in the Yisomim case of Osai, we allow Shimon, the lender, or the capital partner, to swear that he never got paid back and to collect his money, given the fact that he's in possession of the shtar. Amarava, Hilchasa, Nishpa Vagova Mechza. So Rabbi said the halacha is he swears, but he only collects half. Amar Zutra, Hilchasa Kedayane Gola. No, the halacha follows the name of the Gola. Amar Ravina Mar Zutra, Hamarava Nishpa Vagova Mechza. Rava said, so you can't say, it's contradictory. If you say the halacha follows Dayane Gola, that's Shmuel and Karna, and they held that halacha Lamai say swears and collects everything. And now you're saying he swears and only collects half. Amarle, Anon, Dayane Gola, top of Ayin Aleph, Ipcha Masnin Allah. We attribute the opposite opinions to the opposite opinions. In other words, we switch around. In our version, the Dayane Gola were the ones who said that he collects half, and ultimately, again, the Eretz YIsrael were the ones who said they collect all. So we'll say, so bottom line, halacha l'maisa, the way the Gemara paskins is that halacha l'maisa, we're going to leave the case of the Yisomim. The way that the Rambam actually paskins is that Ruvain swears and he collects half. We'll do more of that case. I'll do the Rambam in that case tomorrow. But what I do want you to walk away with is halacha l'maisa, the psak like Rav Chisda. That the way we paskin is that when I deposit an object with Ruvain, even though I'm doing it with the shtar, and now I come back to get back my Sefer Torah that I deposited, and Ruvain says, I returned it to you, right? Even though I can say, you returned it to me. So why do I have the shtar in my hand? Ruvain is believed. Why is he believed? Migo. Because he could have claimed that halacha l'maisa again, it was stolen, since he did not make that superior claim, he made the inferior claim. Ultimately, again, he's believed. What about the shtar? The same way, had he claimed it was stolen, the shtar wouldn't have wrote his claim. So now the shtar doesn't wrote his claim. So I will say, shkoyach. All right, Chevron Zoom. A wonderful day, a good Chodesh.